Hello everyone, and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll, where the books you read and the people who write them come to life. Today I am privileged to be joined by Rabbi Shnayor Burton, a valued writer and contributor to many ArtScroll Masorah projects, and notably and more recently, Kisvei HaRambam. Thank you, Rabbi Shnayor, for being here.
Thank you, Rabbi Yitzchak. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. I must open by saying that we are old chaverim. I'm very proud whenever your name comes up in the ArtScroll offices or anywhere else where people see your names in the various svarim. I always say we were classmates. Not that I did anything to contribute to your success, but I would say years ago, if someone had to pick out someone from our shir who would be doing what you're doing, I would say that you would be the perfect candidate. So
thank you. It's a true schus and pleasure to do such special, important work and rewarding work.
Yes,
it's wonderful.
It's very rewarding, and we'll get into what you've done. But ArtScroll Masorah is very fortunate to have you as a member of the team of talmidei chachomim working on various projects. Now, before we get into the Kisvei HaRambam, which you contributed so significantly to, what other projects have you worked on for Masorah?
So the first time I got involved in working for ArtScroll was on the Drushes Haran, which was the first project in this series of focusing on svarim that are fundamental to Hashkafa of the Rishonim. So Drushes Haran, which was Yehuda Kielsen's, or Yehuda's first work here with ArtScroll, Rabbi Yehuda invited me to join then on that project as a reader, to review the work, the Drushes Haran work. From there, I started with the Drushes Haran. That project, then we completed the Drushes Haran, and we moved on now to Kisvei HaRambam. From there, I got involved in the Ein Yaakov and the Zera Shimshon. Those have been the ongoing projects that I've been working on for ArtScroll.
I was going to ask you how you got in the door, because there are many aspiring talmidei chachomim, many capable people who may want to write for ArtScroll, but from speaking to the experts like Rabbi Danziger and Rabbi Silber and all the other phenomenal Rabbi Herzger, the phenomenal talmidei chachomim, and Rabbi Meisels, they tell me that, many people submit, samples, manuscripts, and things like that, but to actually get through the door is no simple matter. So how did that process play?
Well, like I said, it was great for me. I was lucky. I got invited in to get involved with the Drushes Haran. That was like a side project for me and sort of for them. I was just involved partially at that point. But once I got involved with ArtScroll, I guess they liked what I did, and then they put me on these other projects, and I wanted more work. Yeah.
So, talk about the evolution of this volume. Before this sefer that we're talking about, there's no actual sefer called Kisvei HaRambam, right? I think it's important to point out that this is a compilation of writings of the famous Rishon, Moshe ben Maimon.
Right.
And how did you decide what to include in this volume?
Right. So Kisvei HaRambam is selected writings of the Rambam. We selected certain writings, and we made one volume of what's going to be at least 2 volumes, perhaps 3, of a series. What we selected is the writings of the Rambam that are about Hashkafa, not matters of halacha, matters of the fundamentals of faith. Specifically in this volume, what we focused on are the Rambam's writings that relate to mainly Emunah, the fundamentals of Emunah. So the Rambam, besides for being the great halachist and writing Mishnah Torah, he also wrote a lot about what we call Inside Hadas, the fundamentals of the faith, Emunah. In fact, the Rambam writes in his Pirush on Mishnayos, in one place he writes that there's nothing more important to him than to talk about these topics, which he felt were underexplored or underdeveloped in his time, that people maybe taken for granted and don't really work out what the Yisodis are, what are the fundamentals of Yiddishkeit. So he felt it was very important to write about, and he wrote so much about it. What we did is we selected many of those writings, and that brings us to this work today. I can tell you about what we put in here.
Sure.
So one of the main things we have in this work is the Rambam in the introduction to Parak Chelik in Pirush Mishnayos. That's where the Mishnah says, Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelik olam haba, all Jews have a chelik olam haba, and these are the ones who don't have a chelik, and it talks about apikorsim and minim. So the Rambam says, okay, this is the opportunity to talk about reward and punishment, because the Mishnah is talking about the ultimate reward. And the Rambam sees it as, again, his mission to correct certain errors that he felt people were making about reward and punishment, and the true nature of reward and punishment, and how Olam Haba, the world to come, is actually the perfection of humanity and the purpose of Olam Haba, while people think of it more as reward, and people focus on the wrong things in reward. They focus on Olam Hazeh, they focus on Mashiach. So the Rambam wants to teach us what's Torah really about, what the Tachlis Adam is, what the ultimate goal is, what Olam Haba is about, and then relatedly, while the Mishnah says that minim and apikusim don't have a chelik Olam Haba, so the Rambam says, okay, now's the time to tell you what makes someone a min, what makes someone apikuris. So this is something that some people might be more familiar with it from Hilchos Tshuva, because there he gives the list. These people are called a min, these people are called apikuris. But here is where he says, okay, these are the fundamentals of faith, the 13 principles of faith, famous 13 principles of faith of the Rambam. This is where the Rambam develops them and says, here's what makes a person either Yisrael, and then he's vouched a chelik Olam Haba, as the Mishnah says, or he's beyond the pale, he's a min and apikuris if he doesn't believe one of these 13 things. So here the Rambam goes into an explanation of what the fundamentals, in the Rambam's opinion, what the fundamentals of Yiddishkeit truly are. So that's obviously just tremendously important.
Right.
So we put that in, and then we also have a few other writings of the Rambam that are related to that. For example, he has an essay about Tchias HaMesim, which we included here. The 13th principle of faith is the belief in Tchias HaMesim, so that's related. And the other thing here is the essay about astrology. Rambam wrote a letter where he explains that he believes astrology has no basis, unlike other Rishonim. That's Rambam's opinion, but that's also very much related. So what's beautiful about this volume, besides for how important each of these subjects are, is that I feel it really comes together to present a reader with an overview of the Rambam's basic hashkafa, what is Judaism, right? The most fundamental things of Judaism.
Now you referenced the Yud Gimel Ikron, which is one of the topics covered in the Sefer, and I think it's elementary to point out that the animamins that we have, which many of the uninitiated or people who are not so familiar may believe were written by the Rambam, because that's somehow how it's referred to as we mix up the Yud Gimel Ikron and the Animam, really they're two separate things. The Yud Gimel Ikron were authored by the Rambam, and the Animamims, which very much parallel the Yud Gimel Ikron, were written by someone else. We don't know who that person was.
Right.
Talk about that.
So we don't know who wrote them. It's an adaptation of the Yud Gimel Ikrim. But what you'll find if you actually learn the Ikrim from their source, from the Pirush Mishnayos, what you'll find is that the Animamim doesn't always capture, more often than not, does not capture the full nuance and range of what the Rambam was trying to do. So Yud Gimel Ikrim in the Animamim is wonderful, and people are so familiar with it and they say them. But if you want to really understand the Ikr, you have to go back to the source. And what we found, I sort of knew this, but preparing this work, together with Rabbi Yehuda, we saw how there's so many times, and Rabbi Yehuda did a great job of pointing this out. Okay, here's the place where this is not represented in the text of the Animamim, this idea that the Rambam says over here, and maybe it's a little different the way the Animamim presents it. So if you really want to get to, okay, what are my 13 principles of faith that are so important,
Right.
then you have to learn this. And what's so interesting is that the Rambam writes, and we know how careful the Rambam was about every word, always. But here he seems to have been super careful, because he writes at the end of the Yud Gimel Ikrim, he says, if you think you understand this from reading it 1 or 10 times, you're fooling yourself. Okay, so this is after the Rambam spelled it out. And he says, you can read this. You can read it 10 times, and you still don't get it. So he's really inviting us to chew this over.
Right.
And this is, to the Rambam, is basically the most important 13 things that a Jew has to know. So that's why I'm so proud of this. We're so proud of this work, because I feel like we put out something that's super important and super fundamental.
Right.
And unfortunately didn't get enough attention.
Right. It's almost surprising that it hasn't been done on this level beforehand,
It
right?
is,
Like you're
it
saying,
is.
it's something so fundamental, and who bigger than the Rambam,
Right.
to think that it hasn't been done till now. So it really, in that sense, I don't think it's an overstatement to say that it's a groundbreaking work,
I think so.
right?
Yeah, I think we've done something very important that needed to be done.
Yeah.
And hopefully will open up this study to people who otherwise may have not engaged with it. The Pirush Mishnayos is also not such an easy read in the Hebrew.
Right.
Partially because it's a translation.
Which you want to
now.
get into in a
We'll
moment.
talk about that, yeah.
The other components of this volume, there's the letter to Ibn Jabril.
Jabbar, right? So
Jabbar?
Jabbar, I didn't know him personally, so I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. But yeah, so that's a beautiful letter
I knew I was going to butcher it. Right?
That's a beautiful, very beautiful letter. This fellow who writes to the Rambam, and he says, I'm an Amoritz. He says, I don't even read Hebrew, and I'm trying to understand your works. I learned your Torah, and he asks him for some guidance. And the Rambam, with such anava, responds to him and says, first of all, he says, I love you very much. You're not an Amoritz. He says, if you're learning Torah, it doesn't matter what language you're learning it in. He says, read it in Arabic, Hebrew, it doesn't matter. The main thing is the content. And if you're trying to learn Torah, you're great. And then he gives him some guidance. And he also tells him some things about Elam Haba that relate to the rest of the book. So that's a beautiful letter. And then we also have excerpts from Hilchos Tshuva and Hilchos Yesod Torah. So places in the Mishnah Torah and Hilchos Avodah Zarah too. Places in the Mishnah Torah where the Rambam treats of these same topics. So we put them in we have these at the end, the appendices. As a rule with the Rambam, he never talks about something only once. If he talks about something here, he talks about it in Mishnah Torah.
And you'll find the Mar Nevuchim and different places.
Sure, also, right. So of course we did a lot of work.
And I know you did that, a lot of comparisons in the Rambam's references to these various topics in the different places.
Right. So all the way at the end of the book, we have this chart where we show the parallels to the Mar Nevuchim. Mar Nevuchim is much more advanced, safer. Right. And if someone wants to do further study and see how these ikrim, where they're treated of in the Mar Nevuchim, so we have that chart at the end.
Do you have plans eventually to? You mentioned additional volumes. Do you have plans to include, let's say, the Rambam's Mar Nevuchim and Shemona Prakim in subsequent volumes? Is that the vision?
Well, so for the next volume, we're talking about Shemona Prakim, at least. Okay. We're starting that, and probably the intro to...
Which for our viewers addresses...
So that's the Rambam's introduction to Pirkei Avos, and it's really the Rambam's psychology, Rambam's understanding of the soul. What is the soul? What's a human being? And what does the Torah want from... what does the Torah see as being the perfect character, and how does the Torah work to form that? Also talks about Nevuah, because Rambam understands the perfection of human character and how that reaches to Nevuah. So there's really, it's a very important fundamental work of the Rambam's, and it's actually a great introduction to the Rambam's thinking in general, because a lot of times in the Rambam we get his conclusions. But in the Shemona Prakim, you see the Rambam's development, like the background, okay, what does he think of human beings? But that's the next volume, right? That's in the future. The Akdama to Mishnayos too. The Mar Nevuchim is a mystical work. It's an esoteric work. So it's a work that the Rambam wrote. It's not for the masses. And to go ahead and translate it, we have no plans to do that as of now. It would not be a simple undertaking.
Now you referenced something before, which may be the most fascinating thing that I'd like to discuss today, and that is that the Rambam, all his writings, both his halachic works and his hashkafic works, which are revolutionary, and then think about the hundreds, perhaps thousands of works that have been written based on the Rambam over the years. It's really unbelievable what a fundamental framework the Rambam gave us to work with. But they were all written in the jargon, the vernacular of his day, which was Arabic.
Well, so to correct you, right? The Mishnah Torah, with the halachic work, was written in Hebrew. Okay. But besides for the halachic work, the Sefer HaMitzvahs, the Pirush HaMishnayos, the Mar Nevuchim, and some of these essays were written in Judeo-Arabic, which means Arabic and Hebrew characters. By the way, the letter about astrology was written in Hebrew.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's because his recipients were non-Arabic speakers. So when he was writing to people from Provence, from Lunel, he wrote to them in Hebrew. Of course, we know the Rambam was a master Hebrew writer. He wrote the Mishnah Torah. Right. But he wrote his other works in Judeo-Arabic. And what's interesting about that letter, the Ibn Jabbar letter, he asked him whether he would translate the Mishnah Torah, which he wrote in Hebrew to Arabic. And Rambam says, no, I can't do that. I really regret, I wish I would translate the Pirush HaMishnayos back into Hebrew, right? Or not back into Hebrew, and don't ask me to do that for you. So it's interesting. The Rambam never tells us why he wrote it in Arabic. Even his Pirush HaMishnayos, he wrote in Arabic. So it's a work that's made, to learn Mishnayos. I mean, it's not, today these kinds of things not so common for a Gadol of the Rambam stature. Right.
Imagine a Gadol Adar today writing a hashkafic work in English. Yeah. I mean, it's just an eye-opener.
Right. But what's interesting is it's not only the Rambam wrote in Judeo-Arabic, but so many fundamental works were written in Arabic. Chovos HaLevavos, right, Kuzri, Sadi Gaon, to name a few. There are more. And the Mar Nevuchim, to mention, was written in Arabic. So here we were working with a work that was originally written in Arabic. Now, neither myself nor Rabbi Yehuda nor Rabbi Hillel, nor anyone else on the project are experts
I
in
should mention that's Rabbi Yehuda Kielsen
Yehuda Kielsen, the main,
and
the
Rabbi
writer.
Hillel Danziger, with whom you worked extensively
Yeah, they were the
on this
main,
project.
yeah.
Was there anyone else before we got back to the?
There were various other
Arabic?
people on the project. The
Okay.
introduction mentions them, but the main Rabbi Yehuda was the main. He did all the work of the writing, and then the reviewing was me and Rabbi Hillel mostly.
Okay.
So I'm somewhat familiar with Judeo-Arabic.
Which is, I knew you're multilingual, but Arabic,
Okay.
I didn't know.
So I don't know if I would put that in my multilingual, but I am familiar enough. And the reason why I started studying Arabic is because the Rishonim wrote in Arabic. And I love the Rambam so much. And for me to read the Rambam in translation, I felt like I have to read it in the original. So I got to a point where I could read, I read Pirush Mishnayos in the Arabic.
Did you actually study the language?
Yeah.
Is that comparable to contemporary Arabic?
So it depends. There's literary Arabic and there's written
Arabic,
and
different.
there's spoken Arabic and there's different dialects. So it sort of gets complicated.
Okay.
But I don't even know that much because I don't really study it in the modern vernacular.
Right,
I'm
meaning
studying
you know this form of Arabic.
Basically.
And how do you teach that to yourself? Is it just by comparing the Hebrew edition to the Arabic edition? Is that
Well,
really what
that's
it is?
one of the ways I do it. But there's also I've studied Arabic books, modern Arabic books too. Yeah. So, but you can learn a lot from doing that work, from sitting with, if you're learning a book, Be'iyah, if you're learning a Sefer Be'iyah, and you're sitting there with the two texts side by side, which that exists in some of the editions, then you could learn a lot if you look back and forth, if you do that regularly. So, because the Rambam wrote these fundamental works in Arabic, and we know that the Rambam is so careful with every word. He's so medayik. He chooses this word and the way he writes, and you know that when you read everyone knows that when you read the Mishnah Torah, which was written in Hebrew, everyone knows you got to medayik the Rambam, you have to read it well, right? But then when it comes to the Arabic, well, we're reading it in a translation. So I mentioned earlier, part of what makes the Ikrim, part of what made that they were neglected and maybe didn't get the right study the Rambam would have wanted them to get, was that they were only available in translation. And for a long time, the translation was a difficult translation. What I mean for a long time is because only recently we have a few excellent quality translations of the Arabic.
You're saying translation into Lashon Kodesh?
Into Lashon HaKodesh. That happened in the last 100 years. We have Rav Kapach and recently of Korach and Rav Shelat. Some excellent translations. But till then, we were working with other translations which were, depending on who did them, sometimes clunkier than others and hard to read. And that's why I think the Pirush Mishnayos in general, the Rambam's work on Mishnayos, which is full of gems, if you know how to read it, but then we're reading it in difficult translations. But recently, there's better translations.
So studying the original Arabic text, did you find inconsistencies or anomalies in the way it was translated and things like that?
Well, yes, you sometimes notice things that, why the Rambam used this word, or sometimes, very interestingly, sometimes you'll notice, why did he say this word in Arabic and not in Lashon HaKodesh? Because imagine you writing in English, right? Of course, there's going to be some words.
Lashon
That's
HaKodesh
right.
words.
For the technical Torah terms, right? But then sometimes the Rambam will use a word in Arabic, like, why did he use that word? And sometimes he's not consistent about that. Yeah, so if you look for that, there's a lot to see there. And we were working primarily with the Hebrew translations. And like I said, now we have a number of excellent translations. So it's not necessary to go back to the original to understand what the Rambam is saying, but it's helpful. So when it came, let's say, to the Yud Gimel Ikrim, those 13 Ikrim, there I went through word by word the Arabic, to go to see if I found anything. And yes, you sometimes do see, hey, how come they translated it like this, and something to think about. And and many times in the footnotes,
you point that out.
Yeah. Here's this word. And also what's available, and there's so much available these days, one of the great things is there are databases where you can search for Judeo-Arabic terms. This is the Freiburg Geniza manuscript project. And on that website, they have a Judeo-Arabic database. So you can put in a word in Judeo-Arabic. So it means I'll put in Ibn Jabbar, let's say, right? And I'll write in Aleph Beis Nun Gimel Aleph Gimel with a streffel, okay? Because it's Jabbar, don't say Gabar. And then they'll show me if that appears anywhere else in all these works we mentioned, and tens more that we never even heard of.
Wow.
Some of them weren't even translated. So if you're familiar enough with the Judeo-Arabic, which I am, I can use that to say, look how maybe the Rambam himself used this word. There's actually an example of that is maybe there's a raging debate in some circles going on for really hundreds of years. The Rambam talks about something called, in Arabic word, itakad, whatever. It means something like either faith or belief or knowledge. And there's a big question, does the Rambam want you to believe things or does he want you to know things? Because the Rambam was a proponent of studying the Torah and studying Hashkafa based on philosophy and logic.
Understanding.
And then when he says, in the Ikrim, he uses this word, you're supposed to know something. So, okay, what does he mean by that? What is it, or this Arabic word? And by using this database, by searching for it, you can find other places where he uses it and get a sense.
In that context, you can understand what he means.
Right. And I discovered actually that he sometimes uses it for people who hold beliefs that are untrue. That same word, which means it can't mean knowledge as in certainty.
Right.
Because you can't be certain, or you can know something that's not true. So that kind of thing, which Rabbi Yehuda does point out very often in the footnotes, and we were able to use the original to get to the true meaning. Yeah.
Now you mentioned that you love the Rambam, and you shared with me that you own, I think, 7 or 8 different versions of the Moreh Nevuchim.
Yeah, maybe 9, but yeah.
Maybe 9.
Yeah. So we have the Arabic one, and a couple of English ones, and numerous Hebrew ones. Yeah.
Hebrew ones. So you really, it's a passion of yours.
Yes.
So you were really a natural candidate to be involved in this project.
Yeah, I love it.
It was almost like a dream come true.
100%.
Is that right?
It's my favorite. I just, it's so exciting to sit there and work on the Rambam and to say, okay, what does this word mean? Why is he using this word and not that word? And then, like I said before, he always does things in more than one place. So some of the excitement was like sleuthing to find out, okay, where else in the Kisvei HaRambam does this occur? And I remember when Rabbi Yehuda also, at one point he said, we have to find out where else he talks about this, because there's always going to be someplace else. And that became like a key to figuring out the true intention. Because as much as the Rambam, like I said, he says you could read it 10 times and not understand it, right? So you can imagine how much work we had to do.
Sure.
We had to figure out what he really means to the best of our ability. And then explain that and sometimes distill that. What's amazing about this is you can have like a footnote or just a term we used, but the background that went into that, the discussion that went into figuring out, okay, what did the Rambam really mean over here? And then how do we say that in one sentence or less? I think people who do the kind of work in working at the Rambam will be able to detect the amount of scholarship work that went into what we did. Yeah.
Now, I have to ask you, you went to very well-known yeshivas, very mainstream yeshivas. You grew up in the very mainstream system. By all accounts, this type of analysis and study of the Rambam is not really incorporated into the traditional study, right? At what point did you find that you had this interest in it, and then did you have a Rebbe or someone who you modeled yourself after, or was it just a discovery of your own?
It was sort of a discovery of my own, to be honest. Yeah. In fact, when I discovered the Moreh Nevuchim, I was maybe low 20s, and I was wondering, how could this have been such a secret? I loved it so much. But like I said, it's a mysterious work, it's an esoteric work. It really is not for everyone, the depths of the Rambam, certainly not the Moreh Nevuchim. But yeah, I discovered it. Of course, like many things, once you discover it, you find a lot of people are doing it, but it's different than what I typically was to focus on in yeshiva, certainly.
I think an important point to make is, and this is something that I spoke to you about before, and that is that despite the scholarship that went into this, and despite the intricacies of breaking down the Rambam's writings, and all that, I think it's important to point out that this is a work that's really for everyone.
Yeah.
Opening it up, it's very non-threatening, very easy to read. Both the text itself, which is elucidated, and the commentary or notes on bottom are very easy to comprehend. Talk about that, because you put heart and soul into this, together with Rabbi Yehuda Kilson, Rabbi Danziger, and this team of scholars. It's really a work that very, very many people, men and women, and even younger, Loimdim, could really benefit from.
Yes. The Rambam was a master at being methodical, which people probably know from his halachic works. And what he does over here, he says he has a mission. So he starts off, let's talk about the intro to Chelik, okay? He says, I want to teach you about reward and punishment. And here's what people think. Some people think this. He gives you 5 types of people, or 5 opinions. Here's where they fall short, and here's what I think about those 5 things. Where do they fit into the Torah? Okay, now let me tell you about Al-Mabah. Now let me tell you through the 13 principles, and I'll explain each of them separately. So the Rambam makes it so easy. In fact, sometimes it's deceptively simple, because Rambam then makes it so easy, and you get to the end and you say, okay, I read it. But then he says, no, read it 10 more times, and then you still don't understand it. But you will think you understood it, because it really flows, and you see what the Rambam's getting at.
I like the point that you brought out, which I noticed also, that the Rambam he won't just state the facts and tell you what you should know and believe. He'll refute the points that are erroneous. You know, in yeshivish language, we'll say he bavarns different things, which is really a very human element in the Rambam's writings, of the way he writes. He'll go into our minds, lest you think this, you should know that that's incorrect.
He's leading you somewhere. He's
right.
teaching you, right? And he won't just say something because it occurred to him. Whatever he says is a reason. He's very much aware of the fact that he's trying to bring you somewhere. You as his student, he's trying to get you to a point. And he'll tell you what he thinks you need to know to get there, nothing more, nothing less. So it's really, you can go on this journey with the Rambam and learn something. So I think what's so beautiful about this, and maybe it's a cliche, but in this case it's very true. Beginners can and should learn so much from this, and that's why I think it's so wonderful what we did, because we opened up this study to beginners. But I think also advanced talmidei chachomim, even people who are very familiar with Rambam, will learn a lot from this, because of all that background that I was telling you about, which sometimes comes up explicitly and sometimes it's implicit. Like, oh, we explained it well. So I think it's wonderful, but I think definitely it's an accessible work. The Rambam wrote it to be accessible. There are, in fact, instances where we can see that the Rambam avoided a topic that he may have gone into in the Moreh Nevuchim, related to something that he discusses in these works, because that's more advanced. The Rambam's very much aware of that, and he writes about that in the Moreh. There's something for the basic study, and there's more advanced study, and not everything's for everyone. There are secrets of the Torah, the things that are Torah that are really advanced, and you have to be on the level to understand. And he's not going to go into them. And we sort of did the same thing, even when there's fundamentals of faith. I mean, he talks about the nature of Hashem, what we have to think about Hashem. So of course that can quickly get into very deep esoteric things. But the Rambam seems to have studiously avoided certain things that may bear on that. And we did the same thing. We said, okay, look in the Moreh Nevuchim, we'll talk about it more. But we're making this, we tried to be faithful to the Rambam's intention here, which is to write a work for everyone. Right. This is not the Rambam's secret, esoteric works that are only for very advanced. So
now I want to ask you something. I noticed something in the introductory remarks, which I think were written by Rabbi Danziger. He says something here interesting about you. I wanted your insight.
Okay.
He's talking about your contribution about Rabbi Burton. His in-depth annotated reviews of many chapters are valuable unpublished resources in their own right.
Yes.
Talk about that. Obviously, you submitted many comments, many insights, many additions, which are actually not in this volume, I guess, because they were beyond the scope of this work. But what exactly was meant by that?
Okay, so we have this wonderful base medrash going on, right? Rabbi Yehuda does his work. I look at it. I comment, Rabbi Hillel gets involved, and there's so much shakla Torah, there's a lot of back and forth. There's shtikl Torah, there's, okay, well the Rambam says that, but what about the Rambam over there, and how come he uses this word, how come he uses that word, what could it mean? Questions. And so I think at one point Rabbi Hillel said, all this material, this could be its own sefer, and it really could be, like, there's shtikl Torah on the Rambam. So if you're going to you take a Rambam, we're familiar with the Rambam in Mishnah Torah, right? So imagine you put out a Rambam, a halachic sefer of the Rambam. Here's the Rambam says, here's the meaning. How do you know that's the meaning? You could have gone through a whole Reb Chaim or a whole shtickah to Evan Ozel till you decide what the meaning is. Right. So that's the background. So even though, as you said, it didn't get into here, it sort of did, because this is what informed.
What informed it?
Yes, it could inform
you're
a small
mechaber,
comment, and then that this is the background that you're not seeing.
I should mention just that you are mechaber svarim of your own svarim in Lashon HaKodesh. Various works on different topics. Could we anticipate your own sefer containing these components that maybe didn't make it in here, or
perhaps. There's a lot of great things to do. We can't do everything.
Right. There's only a certain number of hours in the day.
That's it.
In working on this phenomenal sefer, is there anything eye-opening, an anomaly, something the Rambam shared that just blew you away that maybe you never knew before?
Interesting question. There's probably so many different things. What's so fascinating about the Rambam is that he's so fundamental. He's the Rambam. He wrote the Yud Gimel Hikrim, right? And yet there's so much that he says, which to him was basic, that's not so well known. So it's a very interesting thing. He is one of the greatest teachers of Klal Yisrael, right? From Moshe to Moshe, there was no one like Moshe. And yet, you can read the Sefer and you'll learn things that you never knew. To pick out one is going to be difficult for me. Nothing in particular is coming to mind, and I'm afraid of if I pick one, I'm like, I should have done something else. So, yeah. It's just chock full of Chidusha. I mean, his treatment of Olam Haba, I think, will be eye-opening to people. How the Rambam thinks about Olam Haba. The Rambam is very much focused on a person perfecting his mind, his intellect. The Rambam considers the intellect to be the true you, the true person. And that all Torah and mitzvahs ultimately are supposed to perfect the intellect. So his concept of Olam Haba follows that.
I actually think that's a topic that people find fascinating because people don't always know what is Olam Haba, what is the Olam Emes, what is Yemais HaMashiach,
Right.
What, are they one and the same, are they different?
Right.
So it's really something that
so that's something Rambam goes through is the stages. And Rabbi Yehuda did at the end, we have these great appendices where Yunim also, where Rabbi Yehuda lined up the different shitas. Okay, here's the Rambam, but then there's the Ramban, thinks about it differently. So these are just such fundamental topics, and you can get a great education on these things that everyone has to know about.
Right, sure.
And it's so accessible. It's wonderful.
So the greater Torah world is grateful to you and this team of outstanding talmidei chachomim who have done a yeoman's job putting this together. We encourage people to read it, like you said, because it's so fundamental. It's not really an extra.
It's not. That's the thing.
That's what's so amazing. These are ideas and ideals that form the foundation of our faith. I mean, nothing less.
No, it's like you said. It's like this has been waiting to be done. And I think, if I may say so myself, we did a world-class job of bringing out these fundamental things that everyone should be reading.
Well,
and I don't say this lightly. But,
no.
This is the work that it's
There's
true.
no question. The talmidei chachomim who have looked at this volume agree with that assessment. And so we'll continue to benefit from this. And we look forward to continuing to benefiting from your contributions, both within the world of ArtScroll and beyond. And thank you so much for coming down today to speak.
Great pleasure, Abitzi. A great pleasure to contribute in this way, and I look forward to further contributing to ArtScroll and the Olam HaTorah. Thank you so much.
Hashem lahagdil Torah la'adira.
Amen.
Continued atzlacha. Thank you.
Thank you.